it all sort of coalesces, Gabriel, to create the idea that you were probably one of the least surprised observers by recent events in America.
I was entirely unsurprised.
Yes.
And I had been saying for some time, this is not a kind of told you so kind of thing, because I wasn't saying Trump will win.
No.
Because who can guess these things? But the fact that he did win was, yes, entirely unsurprising to me. And there's kind of, in hindsight, there's sort of polling to back it up, right? In the run-up to the election, there was a New York Times Siena College poll. And as we know, the polling was all wrong about who was going to win, and it was going to be so tight, and, maybe Kamala Harris was going to, that was all nonsense. But there was some interesting and true stuff in that polling if you dug deep. So there was a question right down the bottom, which basically boiled down to the fact that around 60% of the electorate in America thought that the whole political and economic system was basically screwed and needed either major reform or tearing down entirely. And, who of those were going to vote for Kamala Harris? None of them. They were all going to vote for Donald Trump.
And into that space, all sorts of things can move.
Yes. All sorts of things, all sorts of people,
and
like Elon Musk.
Conspiracy. Yes. Well, you were early on this. And what you do, perhaps uniquely, is draw lines and show links and speak of almost not a conspiracy of conspiracy theories, but a sort of conglomeration.
I mean, it's interesting when you start trying to kind of make connections between things as a kind of journalist or a documentary maker. If you're looking at things over a large span of time, that's what you do. You make connections, and in fact, that's also what conspiracy theorists do. So I found myself in this kind of quite weird position where I was examining conspiracy theories and how they were playing out and who was seeding them and why and to what end, but also being careful not to fall into a sort of conspiracy theory rabbit hole myself. And I kind of walk that tightrope a bit in the book quite consciously. But I think, it's, we go back to the 90s, we look at the conspiracy theories that were seeded around the Clintons back then, and you can draw a sort of direct line between that and all the conspiracy theory madness that has surrounded the Trump presidency. And it's not like there was a bunch of guys who got together in a smoky back room in 1993 and thought, aha, if we seed some conspiracy theories about Bill Clinton, right now we're going to end up with a storming of the Capitol and Trump for a second term in the White House. But it is a sort of confluence of ideas and ideals that builds around this idea of a malign deep state, that the government is malign, malignant, a cabal, if you will, and that, really it needs to be torn down. And there are people who have been pushing this ideal of a much, much smaller state for a very long time.
Including Jacob Rees-Mogg's dad.
Yeah, William Rees-Mogg.
Now, I remember when people started sending me screenshots of The Sovereign Individual, written by Rees-Mogg Sr., who was a former editor of The Times, of course, like all stalwart anti-establishment figures.
Jacob Rees-Mogg. An absolute pillar of the establishment. Right?
But how dare you suggest that Jacob is not a doughty rebel flying in the face of inherited wealth and privilege. But he wrote it with an American investor called James Dale Davidson. Now, oddly, when it first started appearing in my feeds, I dismissed it as nonsense. Not the book exists, but the idea that it provided a blueprint for what was coming. Right. And that was a mistake.
Mystic Mogg, he was called in the...
Yeah, but as a Mickey take in Private Eye. Yes, exactly that.
Who's laughing now?
Yeah.
Not Private Eye, I suspect.
Because?
Because, what's this? So this book, The Sovereign Individual, written by William Rees-Mogg and James Dale Davidson in the mid-90s, which was a sort of prognostication about the transition to the digital age, that the nation state would fall apart, that computer technology, the internet would rob governments, democratic governments, of their ability to do what governments are supposed to do, which is provide the basic infrastructure of society. They predicted cryptocurrencies, they predicted artificial intelligence, they predicted the avalanche of, bullshit on social media. People were laughing at them in the mid-90s, and they were absolutely bang on the money. But the thing about it was they weren't writing about this in a sort of my God, this big thing's coming down the line. We better be careful, guys.
Yeah, be warned, guys.
Yeah,
if
be
we
warned.
don't
Be
change
careful.
course, this could happen.
They were writing about it like, yay, the nation state is going to fail. And in their words, sovereign individuals whose power will rival the power of the gods of Greek myth will be the new inheritors of societal structures. And they love it.
Which brings us to Peter Thiel and Elon Musk.
Right, who now have their man installed in the vice presidency, or will do on January the 20th, J.D. Vance, who is a protege of Peter Thiel. Elon Musk pushed for him. He had a long conversation with Donald Trump before he picked him as his vice presidential candidate. And Elon Musk is now going to be in charge of doing exactly what the writers of The Sovereign Individual dreamt of, which is radically reducing the power and scope of the state. Elon Musk is going to be, I think, in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency,
yes.
which creates an acronym DOGE, which is also the name of his favoured cryptocurrency.
It is comical but sinister.
Comical but sinister. And so
as
Curtis Yarvin, who is he's this blogger, Mencius Moldbug, he's the sort of intellectual backbone of the new right, pointed out in a recent blog post, Doge, the Doges of Venice were the leaders of Venice. And what did Curtis Yarvin like to point out? That the etymological root of that word Doge is the same as the word Duce, Il Duce. Just saying, he said, ha, 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 nudge, nudge, nod, nod, wink, wink to fascism.
Yeah. We know Trump's former chief of staff has not fought shy of the F word when it comes to describing what he experienced during the last administration.
Well, nobody's been fighting shy of the F word, including the Democrats, right? No. Which was possibly a big mistake.
That's why I felt, just entre nous, the British media should have concentrated much harder on his former allies calling him these things rather than on the Democrats.
Quite right. Just entre nous and all the listeners of this show.
Well, no one listens to this rubbish, Gabriel. That's why we got you on. Just to add to that sense of momentum, that when the book that Rees-Mogg wrote was reprinted in 2020, Peter Thiel wrote a foreword for it, wrote an actual preface for it. So what would this new order look like for an ordinary person? If we do have these figures who are already emerging and will rival the gods of Greek myth when it comes to their power, and then Musk arguably as an individual is stronger than many nation states, particularly when you factor Starlink into the equation and some of the other.
Right.
How will the world change for normal people?
Well, look, they would argue. I heard you talking earlier about your excess of empathy.
It's a curse, Gabriel. Curse,
which I also try to engage my excess of empathy. So I'm trying to empathise with the Elon Musks and try to understand their argument.
Sure.
Which is that the current system isn't really working very well.
Yeah.
And they're right about that. Right. So they are kind of right to want to do something about it. The question is, what are they planning to do about it, and how is that going to work out? So I think the political background that the sovereign individual grows out of is one that is libertarian at one end and anarcho-capitalist at the other. Either way, they like small states or no state, and the freedom of the market to decide everything. The word you constantly hear when you ask people to describe what the world is going to be like under this new system, Darwinian.
Right.
Or Darwinistic, whatever the word is. Survival of the fittest. And a lot of these people think this is a good thing, both in terms of systems, which they think have become sclerotic, but also, I suspect, and this is where it starts getting a bit dark, in terms of people. I think a lot of these people believe in move fast and break things, slash and burn. You make things better. Creative destruction.
Yeah, and collateral damage. People who get lost along the way, people who fall.
Let us emphasise that people get lost along the way under the current system as well, right? So,
yes, they do. But I guess defenders of it would describe it as looking after the vulnerable rather than sacrificing them on the altar of acceleration.
Yeah, but I think that, just to think politically for a moment, I think what happened in this election, and kind of coming back to why Donald Trump was kind of in hindsight the obvious winner, is because the Trump camp, with its kind of burn it all down rhetoric, forced the Democrats, Kamala Harris, into a corner whereby they basically became the default defenders of the system. They became the people who were saying everything's fine and everything's not fine.
Isn't it? That was clever. Tactics, really. It was using the World Wrestling Federation tactics to box
kayfabe.
Harry. Yes, that's exactly. Last time I spoke to you, you said don't ignore the weird stuff. In fact, I think your first series of The Coming Storm, in many ways, sort of explored that theory to the nth degree. What's the weird stuff now? What's the weird stuff at the moment?
Well, this was the sort of catchphrase that me and Lucy Proctor came up with when we were kind of digging into all this weird QAnon thing. I mean, the interesting thing is that, of course, the MAGA supporters were preparing to challenge the results, right? Because they, like everyone else, thought it was going to be close. Maybe Kamala Harris might edge it. They were preparing to challenge it, and of course, we haven't heard anything about questioning the results. Oddly enough, this amazing system that was completely broken worked amazingly well under a Democrat administration. But we have heard it, oddly enough, from some Kamala Harris supporters, right? We've heard an exact mirror image of a conspiracy theory. They're saying, well, look, Joe Biden won 81 million votes in 2020. We've only seen, I can't remember, we haven't even finished counting yet, but she's up to, Kamala Harris is up to something like 74, 75 million. Where are these missing? Oh no, I think she was up to 71 million when last year. Anyway, where are these missing votes? Right, the Republicans have stolen it. So what happens is that you're seeing this mirror image. The difference, of course, is that no high-profile Democrats are saying this. Right, so we're not likely to see that catch on, and we're not likely to see court cases. But it is a question of like how do you play the game when one side has completely changed the rules, which is that, this whole election integrity infrastructure that exists, that they didn't have to use this time because they won, they're not always going to win, right? And they will use it.
It's become negotiable. Well, reality has become negotiable.
Completely.
And I mean, for me, I don't know about you, if I had to pick a point, it would be when Kellyanne Conway said alternative facts. I think that would probably... I mean, I know a lot was already lost by then, but that was the first time that they said out loud... It was the first time
they said it out loud.
That we now call lies.
It was already being...
Enacted.
And the truth is not a fixed thing, right, James? The truth is your understanding of the world as you perceive it from all the facts that you can see around you. But if you move to another place, you will see different facts around you and you will interpret the world differently. So I see the truth not as a kind of immutable fixed thing, but as something, and again, coming back to this idea of empathy, if you do walk in somebody else's shoes for a bit, you will perceive a reality differently from if you stay in your own spot the whole time. So my kind of mine and Lucy's idea in The Coming Storm of don't ignore the weird stuff was take a conspiracy theory, not literally, because of course most of it's nonsense, but take it seriously because it is telling you something about society. It's telling you something real. So if millions of Americans believe that government has been taken over by a cabal of Satan-worshipping paedophiles operating out of the basement of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. that doesn't have a basement, then obviously that's not true. But it is telling you something about how people in a democratic society perceive their system.
It's about the ecosystem in which the crazy stuff can be believed.
Right.
Then what we need to understand the ecosystem.
Right. The crazy stuff is telling you
the weird stuff.
The weird stuff is telling you that something is wrong with the system. Democracy is malfunctioning.
And that's numbers, though, Gabriel. A final point, because there's always a David Icke or someone in the back. There's always somebody, but it's when it gets fertilised and when it grows. That's when the
by
ecosystem...
numbers. So the idea that the 2020 election was stolen, which is, nonsense. Has become, nevertheless, a political fact by virtue of the tens of millions of people who believe it. And this is why, by the way, I think, time will tell whether this is true, that a Trump victory, and a quite comprehensive Trump victory, might actually be the best chance American democracy has of surviving in its current form.